Okay, I'm going to do some problems, miscellaneous problems down from 3.3 at the bottom, more towards the end of the section. Let's start with number 27. Number 27 says we have a point 3, 1, so they call the point P, 3, -1, and it has a slope of -2. And it says graph the line through point P having slope M and then find the coordinates of 2 other points on the line. All right, so when you have a point and you have a slope, the easiest way to do this is to use the point slope formula. Da, da, da. Okay, because this is a formula just designed for cases such as this, and it's also the one we use the most in calculus because it's so easy to use. Here's what the point slope formula says. It's basically you have a slope to plug in, that's your M, and then we have a point, and we call our point x1, y1 that we're given. Okay, so I could go up here right now and say I'm going to label this x1 and y1, even though it's kind of hard to read. And we're going to plug that point, those parts of that point in here where they're indicated in the formula, okay? So this is, remember formulas are just like the stuff where you're supposed to evaluate expressions, except you're sticking in stuff and you're just going to have some, x's and y's still left. So if I want to do this, I'll kind of plug things in the color I wrote them in. We have the basic formula y minus, we're going to plug in our y1, and then we're going to need a slope, and x minus x1. That y and that x, they stay there because you want to have a y and an x in your formula so you can plug other things in. Okay, well let's do the point first. x1 was 3. Well, that is right here. Remember, x1's here, so that's where the 3 goes. y1 is -1. One of the reasons I like writing y minus and leaving a blank is now I got to plug in -1, because a lot of people would put the -1 down with the y and think they don't have to worry about the subtraction sign, and that's not true. You have 2 negatives in a row, that makes a positive, just like in English, 2 negatives make a positive. And the only thing I'm missing here that I haven't plugged in yet is this slope up here. M is -2. Remember, slope goes right there in front of the parentheses with the x term in it. So we got to clean this up a little bit. We get y plus 1 is -2 times x minus 3. Now, this is the equation. We really didn't actually, it didn't tell us to write the equation. I just went ahead and went through it because it might, it's a good time to talk about point slope formula. Let me graph in red. We don't have to have the y-intercept to graph at all. We could just plot the point, 3, -1, that they give us, which is going to be about right here. I'll put it in red. And again, remember, it's really hard for me to hit things exactly with the stylus, so give me a little grace on that if you would. And our slope is -2. Well, that's -2 over 1. Okay, so that's rise -2 means go down 2 and run to the right 1. Okay, so down 2. That's a 2, even though it doesn't look like it, and right 1. So I could start at that point, don't have to start at the y-intercept, and go down to right 1. Oops, and it didn't land where I wanted it to. And then down to right 1. I could keep filling up my whole page like this, my whole graph, or I could use a straight edge and connect the points. Down to right 1. Not at all hitting where I want it to. Just hard to make that happen with the stylus, but anyway, I'm going to try to hit the didn't hit them. Let me try again with green just so we can see if I can do it. Well, yellow. That yellow line hits them a little bit better. So that's how I could graph it. Now if I want some more points on it, I could plug an x in and find a y that goes with it, or I could just look at my graph and kind of tell where some points are. We graphed -3, 3, -1, and then we went down 2 over 1, and we got to the point 4, -3. So I can just look on the graph and pick them off, and again, hopefully that's easier for you than it is, because you've got pencils and can do things a little more accurately. And then if I went down 2 and right 1 again, where this kind of blue dot I'm trying to make is, except I'm a little off because I can't get the stylus to hit where I want it to, that is 5, -5. And so you could just use your graph to find 2 points on there. You don't have to actually plug numbers in and calculate them algebraically, but you could if you wanted to. All right, I wanted to make sure that we did 35 and 36 just because so many people struggle with horizontal line and vertical lines, and they're very important to get straight, okay? So we'll do these on the video as well. 35 says you got the point 2, 1, and you got a slope of 0. Anytime you have a slope of 0, you need to know that's a horizontal line. Horizontal lines have 0 slope. If you're skiing and you have a slope of 0, it's on a horizontal line, you're having 0 fun because you're having to scoot and work really hard, okay? So I don't know if that helps or not, but so if I want to graph that 35, let me do it, I'll do it in black, I guess, since it's going to show up just fine. I can go graph the point 2, 1, and then all I got to do is draw a horizontal line through it. That has a slope of 0, and if you don't believe it, pick 2 points. You would count up 0 and maybe over 1 to get to another point. That's one way you could think about it. But horizontal lines have slope of 0, and you need to know that, okay? Now 36, I'll do it on the same graph just because these are short and sweet. They're actually easier than the other ones, and people dread them, I think, sometimes. If you have no slope, the way that really I'd rather you think of it is undefined slope. And remember, the reason we call it undefined slope is that if you, you can't even read that, undefined slope, it's a fraction with 0 on the bottom because you can rise a certain amount of units, but you can't run over 0. So you end up with a slope something over 0. But really what you need to know is that when you have a line with no slope, that's a vertical line. Once you draw a vertical line, you can see that it would have a slope of something over 0, and that's why they call it undefined slope. That is different than 0 slope, okay? So we're going through the same point there. I'll try to dot it in blue. Kind of missed a little bit the first time, but it's just a vertical line through there, okay? So that's how you would do 36. So you just need to know horizontal line has 0 slope, vertical line has undefined, or as the book calls it, no slope. Okay, so we're looking at 39. It says find the value of k so that the given line has slope of m. Okay, well, what could we do here? We have an equation, and if you think about it, they've given it to us in standard form. If you remember what standard form is, and again, by now you need to know this. I can't keep just acting like you don't know anything from before, okay? So the standard form, as a reminder, is when you have the x and y term on one side and the constant on the other. So, but that's not real helpful here because there's nothing about slope in that. So what I can do is go ahead and solve for y. And why would that be helpful? Well, because if I put it in y equal mx plus b form, I could maybe figure something out because I know this slope. They've told me that slope is this 2 right here, right? So maybe I can figure out what k is doing that. So that's what we're going to try to do. That's the only thing I know to do, and so that's what I do is I try something that I can think of. That's how you do things in math, okay? If it's not like a good form, maybe can you change it to a different form? That's really the crux of a lot of what we do in calculus, by the way. All right, so I've got this, and I'm going to solve it for y. So I could say, okay, I'm going to move anything I can add or subtract to the other side first, and I can subtract kx because it's separate, right? It's not multiplied by the y in any way. And so that would give me, subtract kx from both sides. Just move it, like there was a number there. I'm going to go ahead and put minus kx, and that's a positive 7 plus 7. Remember, we can rearrange it that way. Well, y is not by itself, so let's get it by itself, okay? If I want y by itself, I'll divide by -3. That means everybody needs to get divided by -3. Okay, that becomes 1y. Now, a negative over a negative in front of the x term is going to be a positive, and then it's going to be k over 3x plus -7/3. Well, what do we know about the slope? We know the slope is in front of the x term, and we also know that the slope is 2 over here. So in order to figure out what that k is going to be, we're just going to set the slope equal to 2. K over 3 represents the slope in this equation because it's in front of the x. Now I've got a fraction equal a whole number. I could multiply both sides by 3, or I could say, hey, I can do proportions. I can stick 2 over 1, and I could say 1 times k is k, and 2 times 3 is 6, so k is 6. That's all we have to do there. Okay, so 43 is kind of along those same lines. These are questions that I could really see showing up on an SAT, ACT test just because I've seen them there before. And I think that these are things they could still think they could leave there. Well, now, these are 2 points that I'm given, and it might freak you out a little bit that you got variables in your points. But just think of them as 2 points. And let me, since I got 2 points, let me label them. Let me call this one, I'm going to call this one over here x1 and y1. And the reason I'm going to do that, we'll call this one x2, y2. The reason I'm doing that, I'm just labeling them, but here's why. If I have 2 points, I could use the slope formula to find the slope, okay? So let me write that down since I know I got 2 points and I'm talking about slope. The slope is y2 minus y1 over x2 minus x1. So I know I'm going to be doing some subtraction, and I would rather subtract from the bigger number down to the smallest number. And if you look at this, my y2, that's why I picked y2 over here, because and x2s, they go first with the subtraction, and these values are a little larger, okay? So now, what should I do now? I know the slope is 2, so let me plug that in. And I know what these other values are. I'm going to write down this, and I know I'm going to subtract my y's on top and subtract my x's on bottom, and I'll label them carefully. So y2 is 3, and y1 is k, so I'm just plugging those in for these 2 values. And now I'm going to do the x2 and the x1 on the bottom. The x2 goes first, and it is 2k, and the x1 is 1. Okay, so now if you look at what I have, you go, oh, that looks bad, but it's not so bad, because you can make this, if you look at it, you got a fraction on one side. If I make the other side a fraction by putting 2 over 1, I can actually cross multiply here and solve this pretty easily. And that's just a great math tool you need to know you can do when you see a fraction. Even if it's just one fraction on one side, make the other one a fraction and cross multiply. So here we go. If I multiply the first diagonal, I'll just do this. 1 times 3 minus k is going to be 3 minus k. On the other side, I'll do in blue. 2 times 2k minus 1. Remember, you have to distribute the 2. Some of you can do that in your head and not write it down distributed, but if you can't, you could just write it down and then work to simplify. Put in as much work as you need to get to the answer. You should always show some work, but like I would have been okay here if you had said 2 times 2k is 4k and 2 times negative 1 is negative 2. Now I could get that by distributing or even just by doing it in my head. Okay, so now if I want to get the k's on one side, because that's what we got to do now, because I can't solve for k if they're not all on one side, I got more k's on the right-hand side. I got 4 k's. So I want to work with positive k. So let me do this. Let me move this k over here, and the way I do it is by doing the opposite, by adding k. Okay, and what I end up with is those cancel out and add up to 0, and I have 3 is 5k minus 2, and now we're in more familiar territory, right? So trying to solve for k is right here. I could add 2 to both sides. I'm going to run out of room, so I'll continue at the top, okay? So what would that give me? 3 plus 2 on the left-hand side is 5, and then the minus 2 and the plus 2 would cancel out, and I would have 5k. If I want to get k by itself, I could divide both sides by 5, and I would get k equal 1. K is 1. That's all I had to do. So when you get something that looks confusing, you got to think. You got to stop and think. What did they give me? They told me they gave me a slope, and they gave me 2 points, and they want me to find some missing value. Do I know a formula that could help me do that? Yeah, I did. So that's what we needed to do.